So as a physicist, for as long as I can remember, I took a liking to the idea of safeguarding the world from nuclear destruction. I grew up as a 5 year old watching PBS documentaries of World War II. And so back in the days, public television before cable, at midnight, all the networks went off the air around noon, midnight, the dead airways. So y'all that are old enough to remember before cable television, uh, the major networks went off the air at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning, and all you hear was into the next morning. So as a little kid, a toddler, I used to watch Sesame Street during the daytime on PBS. But sometimes I used to wake up late at night and turn on the television to see if I can watch Sesame Street, and I realized that PBS wasn't playing Sesame Street at that time, late at night. They were playing World War II documentaries on the airwaves. So from 5 years old, I started watching World War II documentaries and studying the art of war. And so during my young adult age, I started studying quantum physics, self-educated, started researching quantum physics and mechanical engineering. And so I came up with mechanical advances of hyperstate frequencies. Hyperstate frequencies are, if you can imagine, a static ionic laser that can penetrate through anything at the speed of light. You can't scramble it, you can't deter it, you can't shield yourself from it. It's a stealthy signal that transcends through everything at the speed of light. And so you can't, as far as armies, you won't be able to shield your platforms, whether it be armored terrestrial military vehicles, whether it be oceanic Navy vehicles, Navy Sea ships, whether it be submarines, whether it be satellites, satellite communications, whether it be any type of computer systems. You can't shield from these type of technologies directed at hyperstate frequencies that I'm developing. And so it's intended to not only kill soldiers at the speed of light by frying out their neurons of their nervous systems, their brain tissues, but also is intended as a static hyperstate frequency ionic laser is intended also to fry out computer systems. So all military vehicles depend on a computer system to operate their vehicles, whether it be land, air, or sea. So this type of signal can short circuit vehicle computer systems all the way up to systems that control nuclear missiles, triadic computer systems. So one way to neutralize a World War III and to impede nuclear fallout of nuclear armed nations is to zap away all their capabilities, their soldiers, their platforms, air, land, and sea vehicles, by frying out and short circuiting at the speed of light their systems, operating systems of these vehicles. So if ships don't have computers operating their ships, the ships come to a crawl. If the vehicles, if their computer systems are fried out, the terrestrial military vehicles will come to a crawl. If there's air fighters in the air, their planes will fall from the sky because their computers will be fried. And it neutralizes the nuclear stockpile weapons. They're triadic computers. So this type of advanced super weapon is designed to put a halt, not aligned with all nuclear armed nations. So let's say if the United Nations vote unanimously to bring a resolution to a conflict in the midst of World War III, my technologies will zap away nations' armies and everything that they have to bring a halt and an expedient end to World War III. So I'm not aligned on this technology. It's neutral. So I want the United Nations to allow all nations to be permanent members of the Security Council, not only for this purpose, but in that mission of all nations being permanent members, it has to do more with with all topical, global, world-based rules. So it has to do with soft power, diplomacy, economics, for all nations to be considered equal and to make the rules of global order with their sovereign equal votes, as all members of nations on earth can sit down as permanent members in the Security Council. But what I do, my purpose in initiating also to allow that to happen for all nations to be permanent members of the Security Council and to make up the world-based rules as all nations feel fit. So America has to step down as being the one dictatorial rule hegemonically over the world because it's undemocratic, it's dictatorial, and it's vindictive for one nation to stand towering over the rest of the world with impunity as a hegemonic power. America ends up being defeating the purpose of democracy if they hold on to the world hegemonic power ruling over the rest of the world with impunity. So that system is undemocratic. It's a dictatorial rule over the world, and so I not only want to change the perceptions of Washington politicians to recognize that for a fact. That even though we cry a good tears, a good game of, oh, we're spreading democracies, we're trying to ensure freedoms, in reality, at the end, y'all become the dictatorial rulers over the world as a hegemonic, impunitive world sole superpower. So I'm against that type of dictatorial rule, and I think America is to blame for that sin of hypocrisy on the world stage. So that's why I want to make all nations permanent members, because when the world is accorded with international laws, that right belongs to every nation, not just one nation to deny the rest of the world to have their equal place at the table. So for that reason, I want all nations to be able to vote their conscience when it comes to making up the world-based rules. So that covers a wide range of world norms and accords. But what I do, as far as my individual contribution to the United Nations, is economic theories. I study economics, so I'm initiating economical programs, initiatives, amendments for the United Nations when it has to do with economics, but also when it has to do with defense and safeguarding the world from mutually assured destruction with mutually assured survival. So I'm working as a physicist and as a theologian and mechanical engineer to develop these type of weapons, directed energy weapons, that can neutralize all nations' armies and neutralize all their conventional weapons, whether it be land, air, or sea, or satellites, to neutralize everything at the speed of light with hyperstate frequencies that can transcend through matter without being deterred. And it can, like I said, neutralize all the computer systems of Navy ships, submarines, triadic nuclear computers, communication satellites, and zap away their soldiers by zapping their neurons and burning their brain tissues. All of that to neutralize a runaway contagion effect of a domino effect of nuclear mushrooms by nuclear armed nations firing at each other nuclear weapons. And so I'm trying to find my footsteps and to try to be balanced, because I'm not aligned. So if I do this for nuclear armed nations, even though I'm an American citizen, I will have to be willing to do it to the Pentagon, zap away their army, zap away their conventional weapons, whether it be land, air, or sea, neutralize their stockpiles, zap away their satellites. So as a non-aligned person, I have a double-edged sword that will cut both ways with this type of umbrella shield. This type of technology that I'm developing for this purpose will cut as non-aligned towards any nuclear armed nation in the midst of nuclear infernos. When World War III breaks out, there's nuclear runaway domino effects. I will have to step in and neutralize the situation of all nuclear armed nations by zapping away their armies, destroying the computer systems in their land, air, or sea military platforms, whether it be ships, fleet carriers, submarines, jets, tanks, armored vehicles, rocket launchers, air defense systems, satellites. Zap away and neutralize all of those capabilities. And so I'm developing a stealthy signal that can transcend through matter without being deterred, and it creates the static charge that can short circuit computers in all types of conventional military platforms, like I mentioned already, vehicles. But it also zaps away soldiers at the speed of light by killing their neurons and dropping soldiers dead instantaneously. So I did this technology to be neutral, as a umbrella to safeguard the rest of humanity from harm's way when it comes to nuclear mushrooms or nuclear domino runaway effect of nuclear armed nations fighting with each other with nuclear weapons in the midst of nuclear war. So I'm like the referee. I step in and neutralize all of the armies simultaneously and bring a resolution of peace. So that's what I do that's what I'm doing with my inventions as quantum physicist and a mechanical engineer, for the purpose of the United Nations to have an umbrella for the rest of humanity in times of nuclear war, in times of nuclear peril, in times of nuclear domino runaway effects. They will need the United Nations and all assembly members that will be permanent members. All nations on earth will be permanent members of the Security Council for this purpose also, to uphold this umbrella of mutually assured survival from mutually assured destruction. And so I try my best, because I'm the architect of this endeavoring purpose. So I'm trying to deal with safeguarding humanity from nuclear destruction, and at the same time I'm trying to initiate other policies within the United Nations, economical policies, green energy policies, evolution of pivoting from fossil fuel towards clean renewable energies. But I also, like I said, am a freedom fighter for civil rights. So I don't want one nation, which is America, to tower over the rest of the world with impunity as a dictatorial, hegemonic world sole superpower. That means that America becomes a tyrant country over the world stage. If America doesn't step down and allow all the nations to be permanent members and all the nations to have equal sovereign votes as permanent members of the Security Council, America then will be in danger of be considered the world's dictatorial hegemonic power, which then will come home to roost when the world turns against this type of system. If American politicians don't adapt, they will be removed from power eventually, because the world will free themselves whether Washington wants it or not. So that's why I believe that all nations, I'm working uphill to convince politicians to adapt this policy of the United Nations to allow all nations on earth to be permanent members of the council and to have equal votes. And so when the rules are based and made globally, when the laws of the world are voted upon and enacted, that all nations have the right to be sovereignly, equally sitting at the table and have the same voting powers equally with every other nation on earth. So I am trying to do multiple things at the same time within the United Nations: economics, green energies, peaceful green energies, electrical grids of tomorrow, but also dealing with an umbrella to safeguard the world in the midst of nuclear destruction. I have to step in, and I'm not aligned. So when it comes to nuclear armed nations, I'll zap away all y'all armies. When the assembly are the permanent members of the Security Council, when all nations are the permanent members of the Security Council, and they ask me to step in with this umbrella of mutually assured survival from mutually assured destructions, I will zap away every nuclear armed nation's army and to bring a quick, expedient resolution and put a stop to World War III in order to afford peace for the rest of humanity. So it's like a nuclear umbrella that will shield humanity from nuclear destruction. As a physicist, I study how advanced nuclear weapons can get. And I'm figuring out that eventually antimatter signals retrofitted in pulsaric weapons can implode nucleuses of neutrons and protons. So imagine a signal that can penetrate through the nucleuses of the atmosphere, and every molecule of protons and neutrons in the atmosphere implode, and it creates an ultraviolet ionic antimatter implosion with a signal polarity, meaning the first antimatter nuclear pulsaric weapon with signal technologies that can transcend through the nucleuses of the atmosphere and blow every proton and neutron up in the atmosphere, creating an ultraviolet ionic ions. You can imagine the power released, the thermal power, when a pulsar implodes a missile in the atmosphere on the lower altitude of a continent and spreads out an antimatter pulsaric charge that it turns all the molecules inside the atmosphere and implodes all the protons and neutrons inside the atmosphere. The only thing that scatters is the electrons with ultraviolet runaway effects. But we're learning in laboratories that this can be possibly done as a nuclear weapon, as the first antimatter pulsaric weapon. And so I'm an expert on these subjects. So I know how deadly nuclear weapons can get. So I'm trying to give the United Nations an umbrella to neutralize nations' armies and their soldiers and their telecommunications and their weapon platforms at the speed of light in order to be absolute hard power realism, to neutralize nations' armies and their soldiers and their platform systems, whether it be land, air, or sea, or space, zap out their satellites and everything, just to bring an expedient end and resolution in order for humanity to be shielded from the weapons of mass destruction in the times of nuclear war, in the midst of nuclear war. So I'm trying my best to, as a physicist and as an engineer, to give this to the United Nations. I don't want America to be in charge of it. America is not accountable for it. They don't have sovereignty over it. It's only this initiative that I'm starting is for all nations within the Permanent Council, all nations on Earth, to have an umbrella, which I call mutually assured survival for mutually assured destruction. It should be overseen by all nations on Earth. So I don't want America to take my technology and disarm the nation's armies of the world and then have their nuclear stockpiles and their super weapons pointed at the rest of the world to enslave the world with impunity. I don't want that. I'm pissed off as it is with America's world order as being a dictatorial world sole superpower on the rest of the nations on Earth. That has to come to an end. That is tyrannically a dictatorial and hypocritical, because America always brag about democracy. They always brag about democracy, but America wants to be the dictatorial hegemonic power over the rest of the nations on Earth. So America, I already know how America struggles with their imperialism of greed. So I want America to step aside, sit down on the table, as well as just sit down and be equal with the rest of the nations on Earth. That all nations are created equally sovereign, sitting at the table, the global table, with their equal votes to deal with making the rules of the world as all nations feel fit. So I want to dissolve the 5 permanent members and allow all nations to be permanent members. But so give me a second. So imagine the world telecommunication systems, the microwaves, the radio waves, all short-circuiting armies, nations, as far as their armies and their military conventional weapons, their air, land, or sea, frying out all their computer systems, frying out or zapping away their soldiers, bringing a halt expediently to a conflict of World War III. in the midst of World War III. This technology was neutralize all the armies on Earth. And so there are different platforms and different ways of retrofitting these type of shields. But that belongs sovereignly in the international forum for the United Nations permanent members of all nations to oversee and to control. So America can't be a hegemonic power with a world never-ending greed for world conquest as the world's sole superpower. That has to come to an end. America cannot have a monopoly on the world stage or dictatorial impuned to rule the world with its never-ending greed, unimpugned with its never-ending greed to dominate the world as one nation imposed upon the rest of the nations on earth. That has to come to an end. So I'm working with Antonio Guterres to make all nations permanent members of the Security Council, and they all have sovereign equal votes as permanent members of the Security Council. But this technology umbrella will be controlled by all nations on earth within that council to offer humanity mutually assured survival for mutually assured destruction.